All right, so moving on to the next segment. I'll be sharing my UFC 322 preview. So Dana White announced 3 fights that will be taking place on the card for UFC 322 that we'll see in a few months in November in Madison Square Garden. Now the main event is going to be a banger. This is going to be one hell of a fight at the welterweight division with JDM defending his newly won welterweight title against Islam Makhachev, who will be moving up from lightweight to the welterweight division in his quest to become a two-division world champion in the main event of UFC 322. So my thoughts on this main event being announced, I think this is going to be a really good fight between Islam Makhachev and JDM. Now, this doesn't come to as a surprise to a lot of people. We know this fight between Islam Makhachev and JDM was going to be official very soon, but we didn't know it was going to happen by the end of the calendar year 2025. So it's really interesting because Islam Makhachev is looking to become a two-division world champion at his quest to win the welterweight title in his debut at this division. Meanwhile, JDM wants to prove to a lot of people that welterweight title ain't going anywhere, and he's here to stay as a fighting champion. And JDM did look very good against Belal Muhammad when he took the title from him a few months ago, and he really was taking it to him with the striking. And Belal Muhammad's face was all jacked up, his nose, his face. I think Belal Muhammad had to get taken to the hospital after that fight. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But JDM took it to the former world champion in Belal Muhammad. But the question would have to be, how strong would Islam Makhachev's chin be at this welterweight division? We've seen it tested at the lightweight division against Alexander Volkanovski in the first fight, who moved up from the featherweight division to the lightweight division. Cracked Islam Makhachev a few times and his chin was exposed. You've seen Dustin Poirier expose Islam Makhachev's chin in the past. What would JDM be able to do having the advantage fighting at this welterweight division longer than Islam Makhachev has? But styles makes fights in that octagon. Islam Makhachev is a great wrestler, has dangerous submission skills. Meanwhile, for JDM, he is a good striker and good at stuffing takedowns. So I think a win would be very important for both of these respective fighters when they fight each other in a few months in the main event of UFC 322. A win for each fighter would be huge. Can you imagine Islam Makhachev becoming a two-division world champion, taking over the lightweight division, then coming up to welterweight in a very stacked division at the time, mind you guys, coming over in his debut to become the king of the welterweight division. Then you look at JDM. If JDM is able to defeat a top 3, top 2 pound-for-pound talent, Islam Makhachev, who would be able to take this welterweight title away from JDM? This is clearly his toughest test. And if he could win his biggest fight, the sky's the limit for him. He could be on his way to having a really impressive run at this welterweight division. And the other thing that excites me about this fight is if Islam Makhachev has a really dominant performance against JDM or finishes him off early, knockout or submission, would this contemplate people's view of who is the true number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the UFC? Because we know that goes to Ilia Topuria knocking out Charles Oliveira in the first round. But then you have to question, if Islam Makhachev is able to finish off JDM earlier, have a really strong performance, would that performance be able to top Ilia Topuria for the number 1 pound-for-pound spot? Because Ilia Topuria, and no disrespect to Charles Oliveira, I love him, and he's an all-time great at the lightweight division. An aging Charles Oliveira fighting for a vacant title compared to JDM, who is the reigning defending welterweight champion. You move up and have a dominant performance against him? These are conversations we might have by the end of 322. So we'll see what happens in a few months. I think that's going to be a really outstanding fight for the main event of UFC 322, though. But let's talk about the co-main event. The women are going to get a big fight in the co-main event of UFC 322. It'll be Valentina versus Zhang for the women's flyweight championship. Now, Zhang vacated her strawweight championship in order to move up to the flyweight division to get a crack at a title shot against Valentina. Both fighters are top 1, top 2 pound-for-pound fighters in the women's division. No matter how you have your pound-for-pound rankings, you would have to have Valentina, Zhang, and Kayla Harrison in the mix. But Valentina and Zhang are top 2. They've been dominant at the UFC for too long not to be recognized as the 2 best women in the sport in MMA in the women's division. But both fighters are great at landing significant strikes. The winner of this fight will rightfully be claimed to be the number 1 pound-for-pound queen in the UFC on the UFC power or UFC women's pound for pound ranking. So I'm interested to see how the co-main event is going to turn out between Valentina and Zhang. But we have one more fight that is already announced for this card too. It's going to be Leon Edwards versus Carla Pratis. Carlos Pratis is a trap for Leon Edwards. If Leon Edwards is not focused, if he doesn't have that mentality that he used to have being the former king of this welterweight division, it's game over, because Leon Edwards could be in for a run for his money. He's coming off of two losses in his last 2 fights, and these are dominant. He got dominated in his 2 losses. You look at what happened to him last summer by the hands of Bilal Muhammad, how he lost the welterweight championship. Then in his return fight against Sean Brady in his backyard of the UK, got dominated for 4 rounds as long as the fight lasted, and was forced to submit by Sean Brady. This is a real test for Leon Edwards, and if he's not careful, he could be embarrassed in the octagon against Carla Pratis. But don't get me wrong, it still has the abilities to be a competitive fight. Leon Edwards has not fought a kickboxer in years, so this could be interesting. And if Leon Edwards is not aggressive for all 3 rounds, I think he's in danger of getting knocked out, because Carlos Pratis is on a tear since coming into the UFC. He has a record of 5-1, and yes, that loss earlier in the year did come against Ian Gary, but it happens when you match up against the best of the best, and that both of those fighters, in my opinion, have the ability to be future world champions one day in the UFC at the welterweight division, Ian Gary and Carlos Pratis. So I think that could be an interesting fight. Both of these guys got to be hungry, because the welterweight division is already stacked with names. JDM, the return of Kamaru Usman, Islam Makhachev now, Bilal Muhammad still in the mix, Sean Brady, Shavkat Rakhmonov. There is so many names at this welterweight division right now. Both of these fighters cannot afford to have a loss. So I think UFC 322, when the rest of the card is finally materialized, could be a really fun event at the Garden in Madison Square Garden. But that's my small preview of what's to come later on in the calendar year 2025 for the UFC 322 card.